I'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to the Social Innovation Conference, SICON 2020. My name is Nazia Ahmed. I'm the Director of the Social Outcomes Lab. And today we have a really exciting session on building a vision for a post-COVID-19 world. And I'm so humbled and honored to be talking to Professor Israr Qureshi today. Hello, Professor Israr. How are you?
Hello, Nazia. Thank you, Nazia, for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for joining this session. It's a pleasure to be part of this excellent initiative, Social Innovation Conference.
Thank you so much, Israr. Before we jump into our conversation, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement to country. I'd like to acknowledge the Daru people as the traditional custodians of the land from where I'm conducting this webinar. I'd also like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians from the land where Israr is zooming in from today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the other lands that our viewers are participating from today, and pay my deepest respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I always say that I'm particularly grateful to Aboriginal people, being a second-generation migrant, for welcoming me into their country and enabling me to call Australia home. I'd like to also acknowledge that Aboriginal people have a really rich culture and history and wisdom that we can all learn from. And also acknowledge that Aboriginal people have endured a lot of suffering and trauma and hardship, and that the social outcomes for Aboriginal people are much lower than that of the rest of the population, and just sharing my deep commitment to working together with others to ensure that we have a really bright and good future together, and that those gaps no longer remain. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I can see we have a number of participants already, and I'm sure we've got other people watching us live as well. So today we're talking to Professor Israr Qureshi, who is a professor of social entrepreneurship and ICT for development at the Research School of Management at the Australian National University. I'm very excited, very humbled and honored to be talking to you today. I know that Professor Israr, you are a very busy person, so thank you so much for finding the time for us today.
Thank you, Nazia. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So my first question to you is that SICON is not just about social innovations, but also about understanding and being inspired from social change makers such as yourself. So instead of me sort of reading out your, really amazing, amazing bio, I want you to sort of tell me a little bit about, Israr, the person, yourself, your journey to being a social change maker, about your work and what excites you, and what's kind of brought you and continues you on the journey that you're on.
Thank you, Nazia. For those viewers who are from different parts of the world, and for them maybe my first name as well as my second name is not familiar or not easy to remember, you can address me by IQ. So that's Israr Qureshi. I understand both of the names are not easy to pronounce, difficult to spell. So if you want to address me on email or somewhere, you can just use IQ. That will be good enough. It helps me to boost my morale, and also easy for you to remember. In terms of some background, so I come from very humble background. I have seen poverty up very close. I'm from almost central part of India, relatively less developed part of India. And also, as growing up in India, I used to read during my childhood work done by Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Vinoba Bhave. Those are thinkers who used to think about people who are marginalized. Of course, I cannot claim that I understood everything when I was quite young, but those things remained with me, and I able to build on those understanding which I had during my early childhood. Also, my home was close to Baba Amte. Actually, on the way to my maternal grandfather, his ashram was there. Those who are not familiar with Baba Amte, he was a social worker known for his work on the rehabilitation and empowerment of leprosy patients. And if you know something about India, uh, that's not only a disease, but it's a social stigma in that part. So helping those people probably won't be that easy for Baba Amte. So that gives me some idea that where if people are interested, it doesn't matter how difficult social issue is, they are able to tackle. And many social organizations are doing those very things. Then I grew up and became a geologist as a training. And that was a very different experience because as a geologist, you are told not to talk to people because your clients are rocks. Rocks who can never talk to yourself back, do not show any emotions, and are not afraid of you being around them. So I was trained in that sense. So I lost all my social skill. I became very much connected to rocks and nature. But that gave me another aspect of understanding of environment and nature and why should we care about it. Also, it gave me opportunity to visit very remote part of the country, that being India in that case. And I was able to see, although I was not trained to understand, but was able to see poverty-related issues, caste-related issues, and gender-related issues. And some of them are horrific issues. Sometimes a different forum might be useful to explain all those issues, but I was able to see those issues up close. And then I got my first experience in a corporate world. I joined a big oil company. Will remain unnamed here, but you can guess it. So it was one of the big oil exploration company. And my experience there, although only for 15 months, taught me a lot about how corporate works, especially oil sector, and how negligent they are about environment, how they only care about bottom line, but not about the communities in which they work or society in which they work. So that gave me exposure to various socioeconomic aspects and environmental aspect of corporate action in the community. Those experiences gave me much broader understanding of social, environmental, other issues. But also I lived in, or at least worked in many countries, almost 10 countries by now. And that gives me multicultural exposures. And I've seen people in those different countries, all of them are very decent people, very inclusive in many aspects, but also expose me to kind of discrimination and marginalization happens. So all those things built me who I am and generated respect for the social organizations, social enterprises who are trying to tackle those issues. So if I cannot do anything, at least I can try to help those social enterprises to some extent achieve their goals. So that was my motivation and mission.
That's incredible. And I have to say, you've done so much. I mean, it's incredible, your sort of trajectory to being here, to being a professor. And if I may say so, it seems like a really young age too. So congratulations and thank you on behalf of the world. So anyway, so today we want to talk about building a better post-COVID-19 world. Needless to say, we're in this kind of crazy time in the history of the world, and we've seen all sorts of impact, from the obvious sort of health impacts to economic impacts on different types of people, and of course it affects people differently depending on where they are in the world, and a whole bunch of other characteristics. So before we start talking about building a better world, a better post-COVID-19 world, I wanted to hear from you some of the key impacts or trends as a result of COVID-19.
Sure. I would like to share my screen at this point, I guess, to give some idea about where I'm at. So let me know if you're able to see my screen.
And I might just also, while you're sharing your screen, just let our viewers know that if you want to ask questions, please put them in the Q&A box or the chat box at any point, and we'll get to them when we can. I can see your screen.
Okay, so screen is visible, Nazir?
Yes.
Okay, good. I need to put some kind of disclaimer here. So whatever I'm sharing today is based on my interaction with various social organizations, various individuals, social entrepreneurs, and they have contributed a lot to my learning. So while I will mention some of them, I possibly won't be able to name each one of them. But if you are listening, you know who you are. You have contributed to my knowledge and my understanding, my experience. So I will also be focusing only on, in terms of impact, COVID impact on informal sector, informal economy, because there is a lot written on developed countries and formal sectors. However, when I come to the recommendation part, some of those recommendations would be relevant to almost all the sector economy in general. But you see this map, and those are from New Zealand. If you don't see New Zealand, it's not that I want to ignore it, but I'm trying to capture only developing country part. So somehow New Zealand got cut down from that side. But that's the sector, and darker the color tells you more the people are involved in informal sector, informal economy, and it can go up to beyond 90% in some of the countries' cases, which is a huge thing. You can see numbers here. Some of the numbers, about 2 billion people of the world are employed in informal sector, and South Asia typically you can see much higher percentage numbers in South Asia. Almost 90% of India's employed population are in informal sector, and then that's a comparison for Bangladesh. But same story with Pakistan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. Also, you can see the impact was of the virus, certainly, but also poor planning. Like in case of India, the lockdown was enforced, countrywide lockdown was enforced at the notice of 4 hours. Even if you are a well-equipped person, if you have your refrigerator full, it's difficult for you. Imagine for those people who live on day-to-day income. The planning was flawed, but also insensitive towards these people. So they are not taken as part of, if you will, you can say they are second-class citizens. Right? Here you can see 2 photographs how the police, who is supposed to be helping these people in this time, are overturning their carts of vegetables. Right? So that's how all the income or all the wealth they have with them, if you just throw them out, they are totally helpless. So it's not only the virus. Virus had an impact, but something around the virus of poor planning and insensitivity affected informal sector much more drastically. There was absolutely no planning done for the migrant workers, at least in the initial part of the lockdown. And these people are internal migrant, but country like in India, where distances can be thousands of kilometers, this can be trying to move from one part of the Europe, extreme north part of the Europe, to extreme south part of the Europe. Right? So imagine that kind of migration happening internally, without any plan being made, without any facility to be provided to these people. So those large section of informal workers who were migrant workers borne the big impact of the virus of the COVID. Also, in terms of facility of healthcare and all, these are the very people who have absolutely no health insurance or no money to actually get healthcare facilities. And in general, they have to depend on in-person transaction, because that's very definition of informal economy, where they're dealing day-to-day with their customers. So they are very high risk of the contagion. Also, they live in either work or home environment, live in the congested spaces. So they are working in a mandi where they sell their vegetables. It's a very congested location. Also, because of lack of resources, many people live in very small part of the household. So in that sense, they are constantly exposed to not only high instance of infection, but then high possibility of infecting other people around them. They don't have adequate sanitation, no access to clean water, and of course, lack of access to healthcare facilities. You can see here, they are wearing masks, but then the way they are placed in hospitals, in the corridors and all, I don't know whether that is more helpful or more hurtful to them. Also, in terms of infrastructure, is absolutely poor in most of these countries. You can see as a percent of GDP, in South Asia, only 0.9% of GDP is spent on healthcare. Compare that to Sub-Saharan Africa is 1.9%, and East Asia and Pacific 4.5%. So in that sense, health infrastructure is very poor. So that also impacted these people because they had less access to healthcare. And then, as with any informal economy, by definition, there's no legal or social protection available to them. So, for example, if we have to take a break, we can go on leave, medical leave, or paid leaves. For these informal workers, if they are not going to their market, there's absolutely nothing for them to claim as leave or medical leave. They have no union to support them or bargain on their behalf to make policy changes or create a pressure group for government to create something positive for them. And that's why initially, in initial phase, most of these informal sector workers were totally neglected. And then, even though there are some programs where direct cash transfer happens, but many of migrant workers, because of their dislocation from their native place, were not able to access those benefit of direct cash transfer. So that's in terms of impact this COVID has created on most marginalized people of our economy. Those are informal workers and informal sectors.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Actually, it was really good to sort of see that summary and that focus on the informal sector as well. And I think sometimes it's, say, for example, for us being here in Australia, it's hard for us to really understand exactly what everyday people are kind of feeling and experiencing in other parts of the world. So thank you so much for that overview. I wanted to ask on that sort of, the next thing that I kind of want to talk about is kind of the approach to establishing a vision. I was watching a webinar presented by Professor Muhammad Yunus a few nights ago, where he said that, one thing that we should make sure we do is not go back to the pre-COVID-19 world. And, you put up some interesting stats around the kind of the health capital or the health expenditure of different countries. So I guess, I wanted to find out from you, it's a big thing, trying to create a vision for a post-COVID world when, there's already lots of things that we were, trying to fix in a pre-COVID-19 world. But I wanted to kind of get your views, sort of, collectively, what's an approach to go about coming up with a vision of what the world should look like, and also tell us a little bit about what your vision is.
Sure. And again, I need to put another disclaimer here. I am not an economist. So for many people, those who are trained economists might feel these are totally out of context. But one thing always bothered me when I used to read in the past, if prices are falling, people should be happy. But then we think, this is leading to stagnation, this is leading to lots of other problems which economy will face. But to me, it appears like if some prices are going down, people should be happy. Like I can now buy a thing at much cheaper price. But economists think always in terms of growth, which has to be, say, for the globe, 3 to 4%, and for developing country much higher than that. Now, if we imagine that resources are limited. We have only one planet to live. Exponential growth or even normal linear growth is simply not feasible. At some point, you will have to say, okay, that's the point where we reach. Now we don't have any more resources. So to me, it's easier to see that cutting down our wasteful use, that means in some way degrowth, is the way to go if you want to sustain this planet for long term. So going forward, one thing would be the COVID has already given us opportunity, quote unquote, of low growth rate. Now, from here, we need to identify the pathways where we can strategically design how to achieve degrowth rather than, of course, at this point, this was a shock, unplanned way of doing it. But we can also achieve some same thing in more planned way, where we are trying to save resources. Like we realize nowadays, we don't need to go to office every single day. We can still manage very well. So yes, in certain cases you might need to go. You can go then, but mandating every employee to come to office every single day is waste of lots of resources. If we can do away with the mandatory requirement, we can save lots of space in the office. We can save on fuel consumption. We can save after wasting time on travel. So we can actually use put those resources to much better use if we think strategically how to reduce our consumption of resources. Many people talk in terms of GDP growth. Let me give you one example. If you encourage people to eat junk food, then the profit of junk food companies will go up, so it will increase GDP, and more people will become sick, will go to doctors income will go up, so it will increase GDP. They will consume more medicines, so pharmaceutical income will go up and increase GDP. So we achieve GDP growth in all three scenarios. Is that useful? It's not. So we can make positive GDP growth in multiple different ways, but not all those ways leads to well-being and healthy situation. My second point is in terms of how we can learn from the opportunity of COVID and achieve something. We need to look towards more the community which are much more self-reliant and eco-friendly. The shock of COVID taught us the first thing happens is in this kind of scenario, your supply chain network breaks down. And if you are reliant on outside support for everything, of course, something you will need to be able to exchange with outside world. But for your basic requirements, basic needs, the community should be self-sufficient, self-reliant. If everyone can grow their vegetable on their balcony or their terrace, rooftop, or in their backyard, so much less disruption will happen for basic necessities. I'm not saying you shouldn't travel anywhere and shouldn't go anywhere outside. No, you should, and you should integrate with global population. I'm not saying anti-globalization is a good thing, but for basic requirement, community should be self-sufficient so that if disruption happens, community can leverage their own resources to sustain their livelihood. We also need to encourage social cohesion and so sharing orientation. I know some of my colleagues here, Professor Kate Reynolds is leading a project on social cohesion at ANU. Dr. Babita Bhatt also a member of that group and committee. They are studying this very simple thing. Are communities which are more socially cohesive, more sustainable? The answer seems to be yes, because we talked to many social entrepreneurs over the last few months. And one common thing emerged from that is the communities which were more socially cohesive were able to sustain their activities much better than communities which are not socially cohesive. So in that sense, regenerating social cohesion and developing the behavior of sharing orientation where people share with each other, with their neighbors, such community can be much more sustainable in the face of this kind of shocks. And final thing I will leverage here is about changing the meaning of work, restructuring our work. Professor Julie Batilana and her team of colleagues have written an op-ed on this, why we should change our working habits, our work. We need to democratize the businesses. So for example, the employees are the one who are running the businesses, but top executives are the one who are taking decisions. It has to be more democratic. These are not your human resources to buy and sell. These are the people who run your organization. So we have to decommodify the work. It's a relationship between the people who sustain an organization. And we have to create environment where employees are seen as kind of owner of the organization, not as a workforce or resource. I draw on Gandhian principle of trusteeship here. As per Gandhian principle of trusteeship, an organization should not have such a huge hierarchy where CEO earns more than 3,000 times or 4,000 times, 10,000 times sometimes with the lowest paid employees. We always want to have some hierarchy, of course, because even a lowest paid employee wants to one day become CEO of the organization. So there has to be some aspirational requirement. But having 3,000 times, 10,000 times difference is counterproductive. So as per Gandhian principle of trusteeship, there has to be some reasonable ratio between lowest paid and highest paid employee. And that should be decided by entire organization, not by the top management. Now, Mondragon is one example which follows this principle very closely. There's a Selco solar company in India which also follows this principle. But Gandhi said slightly more than that. He also said an organization's salary should also depend on the community where they are working. So you should not be working in very poor company with very high salaries. Right? If your clients, your stakeholders are poor people, your salary should also be determined by how much average income of community you are serving. So if you leverage those kind of principles, organization will be much more embedded within the community, and also within the organization hierarchy will relatively more equitable. So with that opportunity to change how we go forward, happy to answer any of these questions either now or if you send me an email, because I know there are many things that are happening, so we probably won't have time to discuss all of them today, but happy to answer if you send me an email.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Israr. That was a really beautiful summary. So in terms of vision, having self-reliant communities, greater social cohesion, and changing the meaning of work and reducing inequalities. On that topic, what is because I know your title is Professor of Social Entrepreneurship and ICT for Development. So what is the role of social entrepreneurship and ICT in creating this vision, or in enabling this vision?
Again, I will draw on my discussion with various social enterprises and ICT for Development organizations. I think one thing we have already seen, even though we may not be a social entrepreneur or not even interested in social sector at all, but by very means we are talking right now on Zoom, most of us have been exposed to alternate way of doing things by leveraging ICT. So if we are able to leverage ICT wherever it's possible to reduce our carbon footprint, that can actually directly help environment and ecology. So that's one way of ICT can help. But also, ICT by leveraging spread of information can, depending on how accessible this technology is and how accessible the network is, can actually be more inclusive to marginalized and people who live in not mainstream economy. So those who are familiar with economics principle of transaction cost would realize that many transactions require multiple things: search cost, negotiation cost, monitoring cost and enforcement cost. ICT has possibility of at least reducing first two costs drastically, search cost and negotiation cost. A person sitting anywhere in the world, if they have connectivity and if they are able to connect to the other part of the world, their search cost immediately goes down. Imagine if somebody has to visit to nearby town and go to multiple shops to find thing and negotiate the price. If they can do online, the time, opportunity cost and time to travel and cost to travel reduces a lot. So ICT has possibility of creating those positive advantages for people who are marginalized. Now, the issue is more often than not, these technologies are either not leveraged properly or leveraged for wrong reasons, and then many people can argue ICT has also created a parallel world of polarization and echo chambers and all those things. And I don't deny that. My belief is technology is neutral in that sense. It can only enhance or magnify. If you have negative intention, it can enhance and magnify negative intentions. If you have positive intentions, it can enhance and magnify positive intentions. But all depends on how you leverage it and how people are able to use it. The second part of question about social enterprises, I have seen number of social enterprises in last 4 or 5 months rise to occasion. Our very own example in Australia would be Street. I think she was Kate and Beck both were part of this conference series, and you might have already heard from them. They have mobilized their collaborators and other social enterprises as an ecosystem to create Moving Fest, to provide meals to people who were stuck in this lockdowns. But there have been many such incidents across the globe. In India, Gunj, Pradhan, Digital Green, Ekgaon Technology, Apna Liye, they are doing wonderful work to mobilize their activities. Because, compared to a corporation, social enterprises are very nimble. They are very lean structure. They can quickly move and mobilize their activities compared to a big corporation. And this way, these organizations were able to use their existing infrastructure and whatever limited resources they had to put to a better way. In Malaysia, Pizza Eats and BG has done wonderful work. In Singapore, Engineering Good, the Social Kitchen, and I'm sure there have been many other examples which I'm not aware of, are doing absolutely wonderful activities to take care of those things. So I think ICT has a probability and possibility to do positive things, and social entrepreneurs are driven by passion and agility to address. But we cannot just depend on social entrepreneurs to do this thing voluntarily with limited resources. We need a framework. We need people behind these social entrepreneurs. We need policies. We need resources to provide to them so that they can improve their impact multifold.
That's an amazing statement, and I think going on to the next question that I was going to ask you is exactly that. So what advice do you have to policymakers? I mean, just this morning I was talking to the head of social policy in ACT government. We were talking about his views on how to go about building a better post-COVID-19 world. So for people like Andrew and others, or policymakers around the world, what kind of supports can be provided to everyday people or social entrepreneurs to start sort of building a world that's not just driven by economic growth, but a world that's good for everybody?
Yes, let me give an anecdote here. So increasingly what's happening, the funders and government grants and everything comes attached with show us the impact, and which is not a bad thing to do, which is important. We have to show the impact. But if you push somebody to show the impact, how things can change. So I am a social enterprise. Say I'm working for rural poor people, and I need to show now numbers. To show numbers, I might actually try to help the farmers or poor people who live next to the highway, so my cost of going there and helping them is much reduced. I might actually help people who are just below the poverty line to help them come up above the poverty line. I'm not working for people who are living in extremely remote area or who are extremely poor or ultra poor, because that will require more resources and less number will show up on my report. So if you only care about numbers, then the mission drift can happen quickly. So showing impact is important, but then creating the right measure to measure impact is important. So for example, can we build up in rurality in the measure? So how remote the place is where you are trying to help people. So if you are helping people in extremely remote place, X number is good than 2X helping near the highway, for example, or near the urban area. Similarly, if you are helping extremely poor people, maybe X number is better than 10X who are just below the poverty line. So you have to build in your impact assessment, the marginalization, how marginalized these people are, and rurality, how far remote these places are. Right? But beyond that, you also need to measure something which may not be directly part of your product. So for example, you might be measuring income generation, how much income level rise, but doesn't hurt to also slip in social cohesion and sharing orientation. Whether this project increased social cohesion of the community. I would rather say any project, whether it's government project, NGO project, even CSR projects in the community should mandatorily have whether this project help people improve social cohesion and sharing orientation of the communities, because that's what's going to sustain community in the future. And so in that sense, all the activities, all the plans, all the grant projects should incentivize measuring these activities, because creating a sustainable community is not only about income generation. Of course, that's very important for many communities, but it's also important to generate social cohesion and sharing orientation. The last thing I will say, which is also part of the project led by Kate Reynolds at ANU, and also Babita is running that particular component, is we are trying to identify if we can quantify social cohesion measure, and if we can build that social cohesion measure into the programs to see how much money is spent on a project leads to X increase in social cohesion. If we can quantify that activity, then we can monetize, quote unquote, say sort of social impact bond. So this is social cohesion bond. If your project help increase social cohesion of the community, then the bond will pay off you certain face value plus additional dividends, right? So if we can create those financial instruments, which can quantify and measure eco-sustainability, sharing orientation, and social cohesion, then we can promote these activities where each and every project is measured by the outcome, which actually help in long-term sustainability of the communities.
Love it. Absolutely brilliant. And I hope that we can have another session sometime to actually learn about the measurement tools and what you've been coming up with in terms of measuring particularly social cohesion. That was so tangible and practical. It's really, really amazing. I know we've only got a few minutes left of your time. So we do have a question that's come through. So thank you, Ankita, for your question. Sorry, Arpita, my apologies. And we have one anonymous question as well. So there's quite a few questions in the question itself. So I'm going to maybe focus on some aspects of the question. So Arpita asked about that countries like Sweden, which never did strict lockdown, face the economic shrink. Is it because we're all economically connected, or they felt the pain and sufferings faced by other parts of the world, or both? So she sort of asked, I guess she's sort of asking, how come, Sweden had this impact even though they never went into kind of strict lockdown? And she also sort of asked, does the crisis bring us closer together or not? What are your thoughts?
So that's quite a difficult question to answer in 5 minutes, but I will try to attempt something. See, even if you are not locked down, but then it's a globalized world. So, for example, New Zealand has no incidence of COVID in last few days, or very minimal. But then, as a New Zealand citizen, where you can go, because everything else is locked down, right? So even if you are not doing very badly, but you live in connected world, so your transaction with other community, global community, has been disrupted. Right? So it's not a question of if it's a global pandemic. Doesn't really matter in the extent whether a particular isolated part is not being affected, but their transaction and interaction with other member of the community, global community, will certainly be disrupted. Now, whether question is about lockdown was a good policy versus not locking down, I think jury is still out at this moment, because various countries have taken various approaches, but ultimately those who intensively tested and traced the contact were able to contain. Those who did not do extensive testing, whether they locked down or not doesn't really matter actually, because you don't know who are the infected people. So in that sense, lockdown only helps if it's followed by intensive contact tracing and testing and treatment. So in that sense, I think lockdown is only one cog in the entire system. There are other aspect to it. Lockdown with intensive contact tracing can help. But I am not epidemiologist, so don't take my words.
Thank you so much. So we do have another question, but I think I will probably forward that on to Professor Israr so you can sort of respond to it later on. But it is also a very, very big question, I think. Talking about your initial reference to Gandhian theory of trusteeship and whether or not it actually holds in a period such as this. I don't know, did you want to respond to it now, or should I leave you to respond to?
Very short answer. I gave two examples, Mondragon and SICON. Those who are interested, there's lots of literature on Mondragon. You can read that literature, how they are managing it. There's relatively less literature on SICON, but there's a case study on it, and they explain a lot on their website. So I think I will refer you to those two cases, one in developed country and one in developing countries, so you can make your own judgment whether it's workable or not workable. Of course, I don't blame, because it's the major thinking still is shareholders' wealth maximization. So that's a major dominant paradigm. So it might look odd because we are living in major dominant paradigm, but pay close attention without any value-based judgment and read those two organizations, and you might find them to be at least interesting, if not totally applicable to your case.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Israr. It's been an amazing session. I think, the topic for this session was about building a better post-COVID-19 world, and you've given us very clear direction and, starting with highlighting the importance of moving away from only economic growth and thinking about people's well-being, and then going on to tell us what those aspects are. So improved social cohesion, self-reliant communities, and changing the meaning of work, and then something tangible as well that policymakers can do to support social entrepreneurs who have really risen to the occasion during this time, and that's about introducing measures relating to those particular aspects when we're talking about impact assessment, but also giving some kind of a weighting, if you will, to the extent to which the beneficiaries are vulnerable in a sense. So I just wanted to say a really, really massive thank you to you, Professor, for your time, for sharing your insights, your knowledge. It's been absolutely incredible. Is there anything that you wanted to add as concluding remarks?
Oh, I'm absolutely thankful for this opportunity. For the audience, if you have a appreciation, send it towards my way. If you have some complaints, send it to Nazia. and Nazia will tackle with that. So, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Actually, we already have some appreciation from Sultana Begum. Thank you so much for your comment. Thank you. Amazing knowledge is shared. Totally echo your sentiments. Thank you so much again, Professor Israr. Thank you for everyone who's been watching via the webinar, everyone who's watching live. As I mentioned, this is the last of the SICON sessions for now. And so I just wanted to give a really solid thanks to all the amazing people who have been facilitators, all our speakers, the SOLAP team who've worked really, really hard. Massive thanks to the Australian National University Research School of Management for being our supporters, particularly Dr. Sally Curtis. Thank you so much to ACT government for being our sponsor as well. And just a really, really big thank you to everyone. Just letting you all know that we will continue the series, after this conference as well, in some kind of a format. So watch this space. And again, thank you so much, Professor Israr. I'm absolutely so happy to have you as our final guest speaker. And thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I hope you feel enlightened and are thinking about the things that Professor Israr has shared with us so kindly today. All the best and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Israr.